Okay. Hello and welcome to another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist in the United States. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. We've been on vacation lately through this period. I don't think we've said anything since the war in Iraq has begun. So we've got close to
No,
6 weeks of
you
war
said you
in
said Iraq
Iran.
again.
Sorry. Uh, Sorry, Iran. I keep saying Iraq. The names are so similar, and it's like the war in Iraq lasted so long, and now it's Iran we're fighting. Trump has started this war on the 28th of February. Um, and of course, Alex, you've been to Paris. You've seen this great capital, this great cultural center. And of course, I put out a piece, part four of my part five series, about the crack up of Trump by the end of his presidency, the end of NATO, the end of all the things in the West that Trump is bringing to an end, the coherency which he's bringing to an end. And of course, he has posted the most outrageous, most insane things on Truth Social over the last month that we've seen, talking about a civilization's going to die tonight, and it's a power plant day, and on Easter Sunday using the F word and ending it with Allah is great, and claiming he is well has already defeated Iran over and over again, but the Iranian missiles and drones keep coming, and basically he's surrendering. The U.S. and the West are on their knees because the Strait of Hormuz has been cut and they don't know how to open it. And nobody will insure one of those expensive tankers to going through the Gulf, especially since two tankers got lit up. I think it was at the end of the second week of the war, by underwater drones. They caught fire and burned. One man died. I don't know how many were missing. They evacuated the crews. And of course, they just let these hulks burn. So nobody wants to go in there except the Shadow Fleet. The rusty old Shadow Fleet of the Russians, they'll come in and they'll load up and they'll take oil to China from Karg Island. And of course, all the talk was, are we going to let them load up with oil? Basically, during this war, Iran has sold, believe it or not, $3 billion worth of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, while it got closed to our allies' traffic, to our traffic. So it's quite a thing to see the world, the Western world, the whole Western world choking for oil. And of course, Alex, maybe you want to talk about how expensive it was to travel. Had the price of oil gone up, so you're paying more for petrol, or was the train cost more, or
No.
how did that work?
I drove there with my family in an electric car. This is again one of the bigger Audi e-trons, and one of the bigger Audi e-trons, and it was. I mean, I followed all these developments while I was in Paris, because you have to ride the subway to this huge palace, or then you walk a bit towards the Louvre, or this palace and that church and that legendary site. So there's always a little bit of time in between to stay on top of things, and it's amazing when you're dealing with these. You've been dealing with these topics for so long. You're following current developments, and you're in a place like Paris, where where a civilization has gone through all these different these different systems, and the population is so divided in all of France, not just in Paris. So it's kind of like a parallel to the United States, of America, because in both places you have a lot of socialists running around. It's amazing how successful socialism has become in America. But there's also a huge movement in France, and it's in France it's always been like that. So you see that. Then of course you have people who always they want to be Rome. They want a classic empire, not a real republic. They want like empire as they understand it. You see that in France, the remnants of the old empire. The French are now in their fifth attempt at a republic. So they had to try 4 times already. Now it's attempt number 5. They still fought their own colony, Algeria, in like the 1950s up to the 1960s. So it's very, very confused place, France, and other places are becoming equally confused. So you get socialists, you get these people that want an empire. Then you get sort of this seemingly middle of the road democracy folks, which is very Masonic. It's everywhere in France, as if freedom happens by itself. It's like this Masonic Enlightenment magic. It's freedom is gonna just happen like this if we believe in this Masonic democratic, magic. Even though that's not how you attain and maintain freedom, it takes a lot more than that. Political science in Europe is full of this stuff. It's very Masonic, very, very magical and childish. And then you have sort of the wealthy class in Paris, and you can walk down these streets and you could buy handbags, women's handbags for 30,000 euros for a handbag. You could buy watches for 80,000 euros, over 100,000 euros easy if you have the money. You can go into the store on the left and buy a super exclusive Rolex watch, or you can go to the store on the right and buy a Audemars Piguet watch, or you go one store further, you buy a Vacheron Constantin watch. It's crazy, and you go to these old palaces in Paris, these major palaces in Paris, and it's full of this ancient mystery cult stuff. It's everywhere. I mean, when you walk up to the Louvre, which is a museum full of ancient mystery cult objects from different empires, when you walk towards the Louvre, there's a genuine Egyptian ancient Egyptian obelisk with a gold top. So when the sun or the sun god hits it, you can only catch a glimpse of that obelisk because you're just a human, and you just have to look away because the sun god is too powerful. And inside the Louvre and some of these other palaces, there's mystery cult stuff from any era in human history. I saw an original Pazuzu figurine. This is like from the movie The Exorcist. When people believed you have to make a pact with one demon to conquer the other demon who causes illness and disease, especially in children. So you have to do black magic to get results in your everyday life. And just the naked statues everywhere, especially the Greek section for some reason. Naked statues, men, women, children, and I don't mean these little cherub things. I mean like children, right? Completely full on naked children. They apparently didn't believe in underwear, or somebody I don't know, somebody had this idea just to have everybody be naked. And sort of this is like the chaos you see in France, and people walk through these palaces and they don't know what to make of it. Should they be fascinated by these ancient gods, and should they be fascinated by these outlandish palaces? I mean, building them they're beautiful. I get it. The construction of it was just super iconic. But to spend the money back in those days, that was really, really irresponsible. And you see the same style palaces in London, in Berlin, Washington, D.C., all these places. They all built the same palaces. And it's so outrageous in Paris. It is more outrageous than what the English had built. So you're supposed to be fascinated by that, or you're supposed to go with the socialists, or you're supposed to go with the Masonic Masonic democracy thing, with the parties, and everybody's kind of hooked into the networks, and you have to go through these elite cadre schools to become a successful politician. And not too far away, Belgium, we had a scandal that was about the same as the Epstein scandal, getting into the darkest of the dark.
Marc Dutroux scandal.
Yeah, and like these investigations, they actually,
which was successfully covered up for the most part. Dutroux's the one that went to jail, and of course this now the whole Epstein scandal has now been put back on the headlines because Melania Trump made a statement from the White House saying that Congress needed to investigate this, needed to be corrected. When her president had called it a hoax, her husband, the president, had called it a hoax and said that the country needs to move on. She said something different. And some podcasters are saying that she is throwing Trump under the bus by doing this. Yeah. And of course, you have Senator Whitehouse, a Democrat, who's saying that, by the way, Epstein, if I heard his speech right, he said that Epstein did more than $1 billion. He moved more than $1 billion through a Russian bank. Now, Epstein wouldn't set foot in Israel, but he went to Russia many times.
There's this whole big backstory of places like Cyprus and banks.
Where Russian banking takes place.
Yeah, yes. Russian money flowing through it. There's this whole backstory of Deutsche Bank, which is like a major German bank. Deutsche Bank and its connection to Trump. Deutsche Bank getting into trouble because of Russian money. And just stuff moving back and forth, whistleblowers, and then suddenly they're not so alive anymore. There's a whole huge backstory, and it's like this insanity that we can find. That was, I'm reading up on current events, not about France, but I'm in Paris, and there's like this all this insanity around me, and all you want is a good republic. All you want is people that understand what's going on and they make good choices and there's being smart and they're not just believing what they see on the internet. There's the great libraries, and of course, if you anybody who is serious, anybody you listen to should be. Anybody you listen to should be an avid reader, almost a fanatical reader, should be able to absorb vast quantities of information. And while I was there, this news item pops up, right, in Paris or all of France. This was a news item that made its way to the American social media, and it was even quoted by Alexander Dugin. The Russian propagandist, and then it was picked up by other big influencers. So the story was in a suburb outside of Paris. There was a Masonic lodge. Apparently, it was not a regular Masonic lodge recognized by these huge super lodges. And people in this Masonic lodge, they had some of them they had a background in police or even federal police. Some had or were tied to intelligence services, and these French services are brutal. They did stuff that that will make your head spin, even up to the present day. They're pretty serious people, and so then. It seems like, and this is a developing story, of course, it seems like a leading figure in that lodge, he was just he just wanted to allegedly he wanted to take out his business competition. So he recruited people from his lodge, according to these allegations, because now it's a big court case. So quite a number of people are looking at serious punishments. And so he told people in his lodge, people who had a security background, that specific people needed to be taken out, needed to be killed, assassinated, because those people were spying for Israel or something. And so and this was supposedly had the backing of the government, but it's all hush hush. So you just need to eliminate these targets and serve your country. And apparently some lodge members did that. But it was all just for petty crime just to take out somebody's business competition. And so the Dugin, the Russian propagandist who loves Tucker Carlson, who just loves Dugin loves Alex Jones, he loves Candace Owens, gives him a shout out every time he can. He picked up the story and said, "Look, this is how evil the West is. This is how bad the West is, and of course Russia is so great. This insinuating this thing could not happen in Russia." Now, obviously, when the KGB was restructuring Russia after 1991, there was a lot of assassinations. So this was specific people from the KGB, like the Leningrad 5th Directorate KGB people, just competing with other KGB people or people from old party circles or the military. So they were restructuring Russia and had to figure out who gets what position. But of course, many people didn't want a lower position, so they were fighting each other, tied into the mafia. So there were lots of people that got killed all the time. But here was Alexander Dugin saying, "Oh my God, here's a regional story from Paris. This shows how evil the West is." Of course it's a crazy thing. If you have some Masonic lodge and people start killing other people and believing they're targeting Israeli agents, like this whole conspiracy thinking. When you look at America now, it's kind of this confusion. Should we go with the Masonic style democracy where everybody seems to be bought by somebody? Should we go with the socialists? Should we even conspiracy right wing influencers are now saying, "Oh, maybe I'm going to vote Democrat. Maybe I'm going to vote Democrat, and at some point, we're going to see." Maybe we're going to see an America First candidate again with the Republicans, and then I'll vote Republican again. So people are thinking, go with the socialists, go with the Masonic managed democracy, or go with people that symbolize empire, because that seems to be like what some people really love. Even though classic empire failed. I mean, look at Paris. Go around Paris. Go around London. Go around other places in the world. This typical classic imperialism totally failed, totally outdated. So that's not going to work. So don't look at Trump. So people shouldn't look at Trump like a king, who has mood swings and does what he wants, and nobody can question him because he's a king. And then when Trump's gone, they're going to have another king that can do anything. That's not going to work either. And and then there's some, the conspiracy ideology, which they don't even, these conspiracy influencers, they don't even agree on what a country should be like. Should it be a republic? Should it be a classic empire? Should it be fascism? They don't know, or they don't agree on it. All they agree on is these old fairy tales, about some these old fairy tales about some little tiny little families from a ghetto in Germany, tiny families taking over the British Empire, the mighty British Empire where the sun never set. That's all they can agree on. So it's utter confusion. People don't know what to do, what to listen to on the web. So I think the right wing right now is a dysfunctional mess, and more influencer blah, more emotions, more political cults, and more hype will not fix it. And I think the Democrats knew exactly what to do after they lost the last major elections. Drive wedges into certain weak spots in the right wing and exploit the major differences between influential individuals, groups, and ideas. So Trump, as a Trump as a person, as an actual person, Trump is not really the classic vanilla GOP person. It's not the vanilla GOP vibe. We know what previous presidents were
No,
like,
he's
and
he's some kind of weird coffee flavored thing with nuts.
yeah, it's not vanilla GOP, but vanilla, and then vanilla GOP is very different from the truther conspiracy realm that is still chasing the windmills of Zion. And some truthers are still for a republic. Others have a holy shrine at home for their prophet and saint Adolf Hitler or Vladimir Putin. There are hardcore evangelical Republican voters. Then there's more relaxed Christians, and there's a growing number of folks now on the internet, who say that Christianity was just a Jewish conspiracy against Rome. So people now, they can't even agree on, they can't. Right wingers can't agree on Christianity now. And people in the right wing now, they can't agree if warfare is a fact of life sometimes, or has to be avoided at all costs to the benefit of Russia. So we can't even have a true debate on a war, or just talk about this in a reasonable way. It's always just hate mongering. It's always just antagonizing. And
Let's talk about the war for a second, because we haven't really talked about it. I I've been following this. John Mosier, who I respect, and a military historian, he thinks the precision weapons have changed war and that Iran is finished. He wrote a piece on this. He doesn't see the problem. The problem with some of the military analysis is that they don't know much about economics. So the problem is, and for example, Trump just tweeted about it just a little while ago, the price of fertilizer, for example. The price of oil, as you know it reached $150 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz has not been open to tanker traffic lately, although there's a truce, a very unstable ceasefire, not a truce, a ceasefire, you could say, a 2-week ceasefire. This morning, the United States put 4 guided missile warships through the strait. It was the first time. So we put 4 ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, there is this ceasefire in place. It has been irregularly respected, by the way. Israel does not accept that Lebanon is part of it, where they're fighting Hezbollah. And so this created immediate problems. So the Iranians said the truce is, or the ceasefire is not really working. Supposedly yesterday they were going to meet in Islamabad. The vice president, the Chinese and the Russians were involved in putting this deal together. But the 10 points around which Trump says everything's going to be arranged are things like the Iranians are saying the Americans have to leave the Middle East, they have to pay war reparations, we get to process uranium. And of course, now, there's, and they're saying that ships are going to have to pay a toll to go through. They're going to have to be guided by the Iranian military. So I think what Trump is doing now is and of course, Trump is trying to convince everybody that Iran cannot no longer attack ships if it wants that are going through the strait. So this demonstration during the ceasefire, he keeps saying, oh, the lying media is saying that this is bad. And of course, he's attacked Alex Jones, believe it or not, and Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson. He attacked them by name in a social media tweet, saying they're losers. They never amounted to anything. They were all kicked off TV, right? And it's kind of interesting. And of course, their responses to him, and he called Marjorie Taylor Greene Marjorie Taylor Brown. It's kind of clever. I wonder who's writing the president's tweets. Did he really write these tweets? It makes me kind of wonder. And of course, there's been talk in the U.S. of the 25th Amendment, Article 4, removing the president for, being not right in the head. A lot of Democrats are calling for it, very few Republicans, but it's kind of funny because the economic side, this just closing the Strait of Hormuz here, which there's no tanker traffic going through except for shadow fleet tankers, um, and they're afraid. And Trump wants to demonstrate they can go through. But you see, there's a constant flow of drones, and the Iranians have still been capable of launching missiles this whole time. And and it's and American warships have some abilities to shoot down drones. If they could escort the tankers, would that make it safe? I think that tanker companies haven't thought so far, or the insurance companies insuring them haven't thought so far. The problem with drones is they're so ubiquitous, they're so cheap, and they can be launched from almost anywhere that you have flat ground to take off. And then you have anti-ship missiles on trucks or mobile vehicles that can come out of bunkers. Um, what is going to be the result here? And I think it was um, the guy that wrote the history of money, famously,
Niall Ferguson.
Neil Ferguson. Neil Ferguson said that if this thing goes on into April, and he was talking in mid March when the strait had been closed, that you're going to have a major economic dislocation in the world. And of course, Trump just today tweeted about fertilizer. The price of fertilizer, of course, has gone out of sight, and many farmers will not be able to afford in the U.S. for a second second planting. And that the reason that not having a second planting is important is you can end up having famine, a global famine in the United States, massive rise in food prices. It's it's a major problem. So Trump is bashing away at what he calls price gouging by the big fertilizer monopoly. He calls it, but the problem is that fertilizer is tagged to the price of oil, and that's just the way the market works. This is how we get more oil: is the pressure on oil prices, so people can prospect and find new oil resources, new energy. That's how it's worked before. That's how we've gotten out of our past problems, developing new oil fields. So, I mean, if this had happened in the Middle East, 30 years ago, it would have been more catastrophic because we were more dependent. The world was more dependent on this oil than it is today. It's only 20% now. I think it was 30 years ago. It was more like 30% of the world's best oil. So the question is when this truce or ceasefire ends, will the strait be open? Will the strait be open? And of course, if it goes on another 5-6 weeks where the strait is closed, the catastrophe we're looking at is just of unimaginable dimensions, because it will cause banks to collapse, investments to be destroyed. I think that when Trump was at one point was talking, this massive destructive warfare, and it looked like the strait wasn't going to be opened, I think like $1.5 trillion were wiped out in the markets. Right.
Yeah,
The
what's
response.
strange about it, what's strange about it to me is that nowadays there's not only extensive tools of wargaming in a classical sense, but there's algorithms, there's simulations, there's this AI capability. I mean, we've seen all the tweets about Palantir. I think Trump recently mentioned Palantir or similar tools, software tools, mentioning them in connection to the war against Iran. Picking targets, and you always know where the enemy is or where the most valuable targets are. It's even classified how good these tools are or what tools actually exist. I mean, there was this news blip about finding the downed pilot with a technology called Ghost Murmur or something, where they can track somebody from a distance. There's all kinds of tools available, and there's all these experts, all these different experts that can be pooled and and brought together to war game. in addition to or enhance a simulation or feed a simulation. And at the same time, it's supposed to look like this was just Trump's decision, mood. He can just make a war like a king, and they don't know what they're doing. It seems so paradoxical to me. And meanwhile, Trump needed all these powerful groups to get behind this idea that he's going to be nominee, that he gets to be in an election for the presidency. So normally how this works is these networks, they give you this opportunity, but you owe them. And it's like it's a team effort. It's a broad system. And there's been this hyper focus on Trump all the time. And then, of course, these influencers say, oh, just Israel made him do it. Right? So the left is saying, the left is saying, oh, he's just a king. He just did that because he wanted to, or because he wanted to feel grandiose about himself. The truthers are saying Israel made him do it. The Jewish conspiracy made him do it. They're now saying, they got something on him because of the Epstein stuff. As if it was that simple, right? As if things were all that simple, and they all explain that war. But I think there's a lot of stuff about it that's secret. And it's not just that war, it's the global situation, because everything is chained to another place. So the Russians had an idea for Iran. The Russians wanted to do things with Iran. The Russians are coordinating with the Chinese. The Chinese have their timetable. So they all have this big plan to take over the world. But the Ukraine, what happened in Ukraine, that messed up the timetable. That was terrible. Defending Ukraine.
Fact, I should make a point here. Ukraine, with the use of drones, they're the biggest innovators in drone warfare, and Iran, with the use of drones to close the Strait of Hormuz and to threaten the oil infrastructure in the Middle East, have shown that a small power using drones can basically humiliate a big power like Russia or the United States. 80% of Russian casualties now are being caused by drones.
Yeah.
And we saw over the last 2 weeks, the Russian oil reserves ready to move out of their Baltic ports were essentially destroyed. Russia could not export oil out of the Baltic. And Novorossiysk and Sumy were hit. Sochi were hit, and Sochi were hit, and that has restricted oil exports to the Black Sea, so that 40% of Russian oil exports were stopped by drones out of Ukraine, which is incredible. At the same time, oil is being interfered with in the Taiwan Straits. For our allies, especially hurt is Japan, and of course South Korea, and of course Europe is what is the price of petrol in dollars? I mean, the dollar and the euro dollar aren't that far apart. What do you pay per gallon over there now, today?
Well, we don't buy gas or diesel by the gallon. Gallon is.
Well, that's right. You're
liters.
Yeah,
metric
you're right.
System.
Of course.
So the devilish.
I understand it's
system.
over $10 a gallon equivalent in Germany right now.
Hang on a second. A
And
gallon is what? A gallon is what?
3.7. Plug it in your car.
Yeah, I think a gallon is 3.7 liters. I think people are paying now. Because I haven't paying attention because I drive an electric car now. But it's like €2.30 or something for 1 liter. That's like a quarter of a gallon, which is nuts. Yeah.
So you're talking $10 a barrel, $10 a gallon or more equivalent.
Something like that.
That's going to hurt people in Europe, isn't it? I mean, that's really going to hurt people.
Sure, but
what's the price of a Uber now, right?
Yeah, but the American military leadership is not dumb, and they have all kinds of experts. I pulled up this piece here real quick. about that. This was a book. Hang on, where is this thing? Yeah, this was a book once, which is kind of important. It's called The Wise Men. Okay, so this was from Walter Isaacson and Evan Thomas. It's called The Wise Men: 6 Friends and the World They Made. And they talk about these experts that people never really paid that much attention to, but these experts they built the strategy, and they did a lot of these things that presidents took the credit for, or the focus is supposed to be on the president, but there's all these experts and they're really, really good, and these experts kind of work out the policy options, and this was just a snapshot. This was just one. This was part of the whole expert class, so they couldn't describe the whole expert class. This was just like these 6 people. This was Dean Acheson, Charles Bolin, W. Averill Harriman, George F. Kennan, Robert A. Lovett, and John J. McCloy. Were described as the original best and brightest, and they were the hidden architects behind containment, the Marshall Plan, NATO, and the broader Cold War settlement. Now, this doesn't mean that they were perfect. This doesn't mean that they had the magic crystal ball. But they all came from these places. They came from Yale, the Georgetown set. They had their own mentors like Henry L. Stimson. These older mentors like Henry L. Stimson. They were pretty sharp. I mean, some of these names I was already familiar with. Like for example, John J. McCloy. Now he was not so visible for quite a while, and then suddenly he was like the point man for scaling up the U.S. military and intelligence operations against Germany or the Nazis. And they were scaling up the military. They were the U.S. military, scaling up war production, coordinating everything with these corporations, and they were upgrading specific banks that were part of the system, like Goldman. Scaling up the banks. It was all very, very meticulous. I mean, this was a gigantic feat that was done back then. People just assume, well, it's America, they can do it. But it takes all these experts to coordinate. And then, of course, John J. McCloy, he became the organizer of post-war Germany. So he's the architect of our republic. The initial phase, of course, where our politics was pretty much run by the Americans and the British and partially also the French, coordinating intelligence operations, trying to push out the communists. And when John J. McCloy died, it was like a state funeral. All these people came to his grave and paid him these honors. And a lot of people thought, who is John J. McCloy? There's like one good book, one serious book about him, and that's it.
It's a pretty thick book, though.
Yeah, and then you have George Kennan went to Princeton. Charles Bolin was a Harvard man. And actually, Bolin, there's a German background. I think one of his ancestors was like a very important general in the U.S. Army. And they have a German background, and the Bolin family, they married into, I think, the Krupp family. This was like a major arms maker for the Nazis at the time. John J. McCloy went to Emerson Harvard Law, and then Dean Acheson attended Yale, belonged to the secret society Scroll and Key. W. Averill Harriman attended Yale and joined Skull and Bones. And Bones did some really strange stuff, with the Soviet Union initially, and also before the World War II, some very, very weird stuff with the Nazis, coming from Skull and Bones. Robert Lovett attended Yale, was a member of Skull and Bones. And then, of course, Henry L. Stimson. Henry L. Stimson behind them. So these older guys, who are already very, very experienced guys, these older guys recruit the next generation out of a very pre-selected pool. So they get all these talented people, and some they go to Wall Street, some become, high fancy lawyers, and diplomats, this, that, and the other. But if some are picked for these very special roles, and so I just I'm very curious about this Iran war now, and I'm very curious about this hyper focus on Trump. I think it's very, very complicated, and I think a lot of it is secret. Now, I'm not a fan of this war, but I'm not a fan of the Iranians either. And I think we can have that debate in conservative circles and try to make sense of it. Why were they doing this exactly? What's the bigger picture here? It shouldn't happen like it's been done over Twitter and influencers flipping. They love Trump. No, actually, they hate him. They love him. Now they completely hate him. Now these influencers try to work for, or they do this multipolarity stuff. They all talk about multipolarity.
Let's talk for a second about. Let's get an overview on the war. We know what happened in Iran in January. There were massive mass protests where Iranian people came out on the streets, and it looked like the Iranian regime was really weak and really in trouble, and people were saying it was going to be overthrown. And then the Iranians, they shipped in foreign fighters. They mowed down, as many as 20,000 people. We don't know the exact number. 20,000 or more people were mowed down on the streets. They arrested, I think it was something like 43,000 were arrested, and it was a death penalty they announced for those people who got arrested as protesters. And Trump got on TV, said help is on the way. This is really what triggered this attack. I mean, the 12-day war, which happened last June, the Israelis wanted to continue strikes to cause the regime to be destabilized, and Trump said no after one American bombing raid against their nuclear facility, underground mountain complex in Iran, where they were, working on a nuclear weapon. And we kind of claimed victory at the time, but of course we know that we didn't destroy their project then. And it's since come out that they have enough processed nuclear material to make about 10, 12 bombs, nuclear weapons, if they want to make them now, or if they can. They have that capability. So they've mixed up these reasons. We have to stop Iran from getting a bomb, or when Trump initially started the strikes, along with Israel on the 28th of February, it was the Iranian people, he said, need to stay in their homes, and then when they come out of their homes, they can claim their country. Well, it started with a giant decapitation strike. They had a deadline. The Iranians were supposed to get back to us about the negotiation, and instead of letting them get back to us, we gave the coordinates. Trump gave the coordinates to Israeli IDF to drop 30 bombs on the compound where Ayatollah Khamenei was, and killed him and about 40 other members of his government, give or take. So we wiped out the senior leadership of the Iranian government the day before the deadline. I believe it was March 1st. And it was kind of like a surprise attack. And of course, the theory was that this decapitation would allow the collapse of the regime. But the regime has its parallel institutions after the Leninist style, where you have layers of control. You have the IRCG, which is really powerful. You really didn't wipe out the leadership. You just killed the older leaders. And of course, older men are typically more cautious, less radical than younger men. And now you have the younger men in charge. You don't have an 86-year-old or 85-year-old, however old Khamenei was, to his 50-something-year-old son taking power. That's an example throughout all these ministries.
But wasn't
younger
it?
men
But
taking
wasn't
over.
it? But
Yeah.
isn't it? Wasn't it a severe chilling effect to see those precision strikes? So the chilling effect must extend to these other people that are running around in Iran and have ties to the Russians, of course, because the Russians had made possible this mullah revolution, decades ago.
Well, the Ayatollah Khamenei was educated at Moscow State University.
Yeah. It's like
Many
a
of
proxy.
the top
The
leaders
regime is a
had
the regime
Russian background.
The regime is a proxy. but it must be a significant chilling effect because it was so many different people that were taken out, and also I think, I mean, it was to me it was a serious humiliation of Russia, because the Russians they've been talking this incredible game, for so many years. We can, everybody who is on our side will be winners. We make your dreams come true. We will support any secession movement in the world, and we promise corrupt people in the world, if they secede, they can get Russian money. We're going to invite you to Russia, and you're going to have all these women and all the stuff that you want, however crazy. And we're just going to make winners out of you. This was kind of like the Moscow pitch, right? And we saw a lot of Moscow Muppets actually going over there, coming back, talk the talking points, and talk about secession. There's been secession talk in Germany. People say, we want basically the wall back. We want the Berlin Wall back. We want to just, cut off a big part of Germany and have it aligned with Russia once again, like it was during the Cold War. Then we saw people in Spain saying, we want to break off, part of Spain, and the Russians were interested in that. There's been secessionist groups in Texas with some secession people in Texas with ties
Catalonian
to Russia.
Secession in Spain.
Yeah, with ties to Russia. Simultaneously, the Russians.
You had a California secession movement based by
and it's like
Americans and Russians.
And it's like when the Russians are schmoozing up to secessionists in Texas, the Russians are simultaneously working radical Mexicans across the other side of the border, saying, we're going to make you winners. If you do what we want, what Moscow wants, we're going to make you the winners. You're going to take back territory from those evil gringos, and we're going to give you all this money and women and everything. You're going to be winners. It was all this pitch for all this time. You go with Moscow, it's going to be successful because the West is so stupid.
Today's
and the West,
crazy claims seem to be tomorrow's headline.
Because it's there for the taking. The West is so slow, and the West is dumb, and the West is so weak. And just go with Moscow, you'll be a winner. But all the time, these one after the other, one of these groups that want to be with Moscow, it's to start failing. They had this, basically this was a secessionist movement, a fake secessionist movement with Crimea. This was just a takeover disguised as secession. And then we had these libertarian fools, these libertarian weirdos talk about it, like Ron Paul, and said, well, that's freedom. These people wanted to be Russian, so they can make this choice, and now Crimea is Russian. And then more fake secession movements happened in the east of Ukraine. So it's all just a takeover with these green men in these green uniforms.
In Donbass, it created a war that started in 2014.
Yeah. And so then came the actual invasion, which was just what they always wanted to do, a classic invasion, take Ukraine, take the people that they desperately needed to fix the demographics, take the industry, which was so vital. The industry in Ukraine was so vital for Russia as a classic empire for their military. It's right next door. Just take it, right? Failed. Failure. The Assad regime, Syria, failure. Now
By the
Iran,
way, the Russians tend to fail up. They tend to do that. As they're failing, their opponent's strategic position is eroding. So going back to Iran now, they did this decapitation and it didn't work. The Iranian government didn't fall apart. Now Trump has claimed we sank their navy, we sank the air force. They got something like 26,000 of these fast boats that can lay mines, that can attack, that are still intact, that are in bunkers and caves and camouflaged along the long coastline. They're very hard to get at, and the Iranians also have drones and underwater drones. And so the strait traffic has stopped. Now, today, during the ceasefire, we put 4 warships through there to sort of demonstrate. But it's a shaky ceasefire. And the delegations arrived in Islamabad yesterday. You'll be interested to know. Do you know who's leading the U.S. delegation?
Let's hear it.
Vance, Vice President
Yeah.
J.D. Vance, is the leader of it. Recently come off of campaigning for Mr. Orban, the Russian puppet in Hungary. So you have the Vice President and President of the United States supporting a Russian puppet in Hungary. We insult all of NATO, and Trump is talking about closing bases in Europe and withdrawing troops out of Europe. He's talking about that, and he's calling them cowards and paper tigers because they won't help against Iran. NATO is a defensive alliance, ladies and gentlemen. It is not an offensive alliance to support attacks on other countries. They didn't support the U.S. in the Vietnam War. They're not supporting us against Iran because it's a defensive alliance. Nobody decided to, President Johnson didn't say, well, I'm pulling out of NATO because you won't help me against the communists in Vietnam. He didn't say that. Right? So and besides, NATO countries don't have the power projection capabilities, don't have the type of militaries. The British have brought minesweepers forward, by the way, to be prepared. So they've been helping in that regard. Everybody wants those straits cleared, but it's like, can we clear it? Trump is claiming that the oil companies are cowards. They can't go through. So now the demands that the Iranians are making. Now, there's 4 main demands the Iranians are making that are non-negotiable, they say. And they are that the Strait of Hormuz, that they want the sanctions
system?
lifted. They want to have a part of the control of the Strait of Hormuz ongoing, who comes in and out. I'm assuming they're going to want some kind of toll, right? And they want $6 billion in frozen assets. And I just read this morning, if I read correctly, that we have unfrozen those assets as of this morning. So this is like, we're showing good faith here. And of course, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament is the main lead negotiator for Tehran. So we already have agreed to give them the $6 billion, which is astonishing, given that, okay, if we've destroyed their military, why are we giving anything? If they can't close the Strait of Hormuz, why would we give them the $6 billion? And of course, they're calling it money for rebuilding. And of course, they're saying that they are going to continue to make uranium, enriched uranium. And of course, Tehran is pushing to end the war in Lebanon to get the Israelis to withdraw.
I mean, there was a plan. I mean,
yeah.
there used to be like this program. I think this was with the Iraq War, where there was a systematic attempt to buy off specific people from the Saddam Hussein regime. And this could be like bigger people. This could be like mid-tier people or lower-tier people. Anybody who could give away relevant information or just make relevant things happen. So you don't necessarily have to fight everybody. You can buy some people, and maybe this is an attempt to buy some people in Iran now and say, well, it's either like the old saying, it's plata or plomo. It's either you get money or you get bullets. You just take your pick. And I think there may be some kind of method to it, because Russia is running out of money. I mean, the projections are difficult to make. I understand that, but there's it costs money. It costs Russia a lot of money to prop up a system like Iran and buy their loyalty. When the Iranians they might shift to another place. It is not necessarily directly the U.S. so much, but maybe some kind of group of countries, or maybe just have like a foot in the door. So maybe this is kind of there's all kinds of debates going on probably now within Iran. So do we play poker here and bet more on this, or do we come to an understanding with the U.S. government and other players in the region? Because it's not just it's not just the U.S. being active there. It's not just Israel being active in the region. There's other players too. So I'm really this is it's kind of screwing up the Russian timeline. It's kind of screwing up the Russian finances, and from the American side, they may run a simulation or they may run a war game where the U.S. is is spending a specific amount of money and spending a specific amount of military perishable items, rockets and all that. And the result is going to be, according to some projection of war game, 20 years of or 30 years of things gonna be acceptable, right? Versus the other projections that it's not gonna be okay in 10 years. Because according to NATO, all these NATO people and all these heads of states here, they have been briefed. And there's a lot of talk in Europe about don't take anything at face value when European leaders say something. When they say, "Oh, we don't like the Americans," or "Oh, Trump is all terrible," and Republicans, "Oh my God, it's so awful." Don't take statements at face value. This is something that we hear a lot now, because they've all been briefed. They all been briefed on a timeline that the Russians had. This was like a major offensive in 2029. This was like what Russia was gearing up for, and it seems like the timeline is off now. It's not going according to that timeline.
Why do you say the timeline is off now? And of course, I saw that the chief of the German army, what's his name? I'm trying to remember. Starts with a C. He made the statement that they believe that the Russians are preparing for an offensive for 2029, which is interesting. It's much later in the decade than I would have thought. I've heard the dates 2027, 2028. 2029 is the year that the United States starts producing new nuclear weapons, new generation of nuclear weapons. If the Democrats don't cut those programs, if our financial system doesn't collapse. Do you really think that there'll be peace with Iran? That given the broken promises and sort of perfidiousness of the United States in attacking them before the deadline, killing their leaders, war by assassination, do you think that there's going to be enough trust to be able to have an agreement that holds? Given that the two sides are very far apart, by the way,
I think Iran had. I think Iran had its own timeline. And I think the timeline is screwed up now. And I think that a lot of people in Iran, because when you talk about a classic regime, right? We Europeans have lots of experiences with classic regimes, right? So in a classic regime, it's so top down that the actual leadership at the top, they have to terrify everybody below. So this is also what the Soviets did, when you just breathed in the wrong direction or you fell under suspicion, you were not with the current line anymore, you could be removed in an instant. Didn't matter if you were famous, didn't matter if you were one of the original guys hanging out with Lenin and doing the revolution with Lenin, didn't matter. You were just gone. And I think that there was a timeline order from the very top. The top was enjoying the biggest, luxury, and the top had the connection to the biggest connection to the Russians. But below the very top in Iran, there's other people that may have had other ideas, but they didn't see an opportunity until now. And so there may be a bigger war game that had been done. Considering all what the Russians are planning and the Chinese were planning in different places in the world, and maybe what we saw now with the Iran war or the attacks against Iran, maybe that was just a strategic move to buy time, because the Americans have their own timeline. The Americans, they have their own projections and simulations. And if they can see, okay, we need to stretch out the time here and we need to stretch out a timeline there, or we need to slow down Iran's timeline. We need to slow down Russia's timeline. Then we're going to spend the money to attack Iran, and we're going to absorb all the anger from the U.S. population and internationally. Everybody's just, of course, aching with the rising costs of living. There's so many factors that go into this. So I'm really, I really want to be super careful with this. And who is out there? Who is out there giving people a broad picture of this? It's all about one set of voters and influencers. They expected these miracles. They expected what the Trump hype kind of said, but they said many things. Never going to be involved in any war again. We're just going to abandon Ukraine. We're going to abandon Europe. We're going to abandon everyone. We're just going to be in our United States and not care what the rest of the world is doing. This was not realistic, this was never realistic. And of course, these people are now saying that it's all because of Israel. Trump is just doing what Israel is telling him to do because of Epstein and the windmills of Zion, and that's not a real explanation either. And so I think that when we look at these people that made these decisions or are the faces of this decision, Trump and Vance and the chiefs of staff and all these people, I mean, we have to understand these people and how they got to be where they're now. What about these wise men? What about these levels of these cadre schools of experts that are figuring these things out? I mean, to me, it was clear from the beginning. It was clear from the beginning of the Trump hype over a decade ago that this was a standard, GOP big tent strategy that carried the risk of falling apart in endless infighting. When a war happens or anything happens, I think Trump was not really a fit for any significant right-wing group, let alone for all of them simultaneously. So I said back then the party should have picked a presidential candidate that was as far away from the Epstein scandal and other scandals as possible, and somebody who's more credible, somebody who's very clean, and somebody who is who has meaningful connections, who is very well read, somebody who understands old empires, different republics that happened, and just understands the Russians, understands the Cold War, understands the Chinese, and all of that. We should have had a candidate like that, and but strangely, segments of the GOP universe and associated powerful players still went with Donald Trump, very controversial man, versed in casinos, real estate, and beauty contests. So they put all this public focus on him. Who actually put Trump in this position so he can, supposedly make this decision and override everybody and just make the party unpopular so close to the midterms? Who put him there? That's kind of the interesting question.
I think that Neil Postman has the answer to that. It's we live in the age of entertainment, and he's a TV personality. And when a TV personality runs for president, we saw this in 2015 and 16 when he first time he ran for president. He basically was able to, because of his media savvy, he was basically able to get all the cameras on him. And then he used new tactics that no presidential candidate had ever used, negative campaigning, which had always been destructive. And he had high negatives. Hillary Clinton had high negatives, by the way, too. But he ended up beating everybody with his high negatives because he was so good at garnering attention. And of course, the name recognition of being a reality TV star. It's like Ronald Reagan being a movie star, becoming president. In the age of entertainment, Neil Postman would say, the entertainer is the person who's going to be on top. We have an actor as president in Ukraine. We have people from the entertainment industry. They've got this special leg up in terms of running for political office, whatever they actually know. And so he won the presidency by a hair, really, in 2016. And then he came back after all this controversy, after Biden couldn't find his way off stage and was suffering from dementia. We get him winning with a much bigger margin in 2024. And I don't think anyone put him in there. I got to be honest, although Trump seems to be part of the Epstein subset, and I think Epstein was a Russian honey trap, and Trump was his friend for 15 years. So there may be something to the idea that the Russians wanted Trump in there. And that,
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've
because,
looked at. Yeah,
this Epstein thing is really an incubus. It's really getting bad.
that was something I looked at, even 10 years ago, or even over 10 years ago, when Trump became a serious candidate, and was suddenly just changed from this casino guy and beauty contest guy to a serious politician all of a sudden. And I mean, to be fair, I mean, even when you look at these old his campaign back then, like in 2015 roundabout, I think in December of 2015, Trump had this appearance on the Alex Jones show. And in that interview, Trump said Iran was a massive danger. Iran was a massive problem, and he talked about taking the oil. I mean, he was talking about in Iraq, but he was talking very fast.
Trump was against the Iraq War, and he spoke about being against the Iraq War.
And he said nobody quite took the oil, and people should have taken the oil, and now he talks about taking the oil. But even back then, he said Iran was a massive problem. But these influencers, they glossed over it. These influencers, they glossed over it.
The military reality is he can't take the oil because the Strait of Hormuz, if we went in on a land war now, after the strait has been closed now for a number of weeks, it would mean that, 3 months from now, the strait might be closed. And if that happens, you're going to have worldwide famine. You're going to have bank collapses. You're going to have financial bubbles, because all this, the petrodollar won't be wanted anymore. It will collapse the entire Western trading system and financial system.
Yeah.
So he cannot prosecute this war. And the Iranians, with their Chinese allies, realize that they now have literally America over a barrel. Trump likes to brag, we don't get any oil, right, from the Middle East. The United States says, well, California does get some, but basically we have our own kind of oil independence. But here's the problem. It's a financial interdependence. Oil prices are global. The price of everything here is affected by that, not as much as in Europe or Japan. And our allies, this is the strategic problem. Russia, China, and Iran can now say to Japan, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. We have a razor blade to the carotid artery of your oil supply, which is like your blood supply, right, to your brain. If you don't drop the Americans as an ally, if you don't switch over to our side and become part of our thing, we're going to make sure you never get that oil again. And they can do the same thing to Europe, but not with the intensity they can with Japan. And Japan has technological capabilities and industries that the United States absolutely needs, and that Russia, of course, and China would covet. And it would be a massive shift in the balance of power.
Yeah, also we saw, over the last years, we saw influential Republicans talking about this. Republicans talking about this idea that maybe we can make a new deal with the Russians. Maybe we can find a way to work with them.
Crazy.
Maybe we can.
By the way, that's what Zelensky said the other day. He said the problem with the Americans, he said it was disgraceful that they think Putin is trustworthy.
Yeah. It's like this harebrained idea that you can drive a wedge between Russia and China. You know, you lure the Russians to the American side, and blah 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 blah. Very harebrained idea, and it's like this. It's like this back and forth that we saw, you know, with Ukraine and now with Iran. It's like America is doing something, pulling back, doing something, pulling back, saying we're going to do something. Oh, maybe not. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. It almost
There's no
from one perspective,
consistency in Mr.
yeah,
Trump. No, there's no consistency.
from one perspective, it looks like a negotiation strategy, which is a weird one, because some people may actually believe in high places. You know, maybe we can appear strong enough, appear forceful enough, and then the Russians will come to our side, and then we'll also have Iran in the mix, and they'll behave, and it's all gonna work out, right? Because it's like they didn't go full in on regime change in Iran. They didn't go full in on or stronger in on defending Ukraine. And this is sort of like this could be a negotiation strategy, which would be very dangerous. And I think that both parties in the U.S., both parties in the U.S. Have a massive infiltration problem in terms of Russian espionage, also Chinese, but I think more deeply embedded are Russian spies and Russian assets. And there's been like weird stuff coming from these skull and bones types, some of these Boston families, the Boston Brahmins, and like they're called. There's like strange stuff that happened with the what's it called? The Council for National Policy, the CNP. It's like a very silent organization, didn't want any attraction. And the CNP, they wield the people that are part of the CNP, they wield a lot of power. They were the ones reportedly, it's really hard to confirm, but they had an influence on these big evangelical churches to go with Trump, even though they didn't want him. And also, the CNP kind of overlapped strongly for a time. The CNP overlapped with the John Birch Society and these kind of conspiracy guys. And we saw that the conspiracy guys got on board with Trump over 10 years ago. All of a sudden, they were very skeptical at first, like, what? Why Trump? What's this casino guy doing here? And then within months, it was, he's the savior. He's the political messiah. He's going to save us. And he's friendly with Putin, or he's going to be friendly with Putin. And so they're going to run the world. So it's these weird mechanisms, oftentimes in the background, that shape Republican policy, or they can shape who gets to be important in the Republican Party. And if those background mechanisms are infiltrated, like super infiltrated, not just some basic sleeper cell in the Washington D.C. area, some fake couple, that's been trained by KGB or post KGB. I mean, actual sleeper rings embedded in, especially the East Coast, right? Like who got Trump to be president, right? Everybody likes to talk about, the influence of tiny little Israel and the Israel lobby and the windmills of Zion. But what about the serious infiltration of Russian espionage? And so we saw all this weird stuff with Trump in the beginning, 10 years ago. The contacts, the people around Trump, the Michael Cohens, the Felix Saters, and all these other people. Very strange stuff. There was strange stuff with Deutsche Bank, this very large bank. Deutsche Bank and money that was, from different institutions, money that was lent to Trump or the Trump organization and his many businesses. weird stuff. What was this guy that was close to Trump who had something to do with Cyprus and all the money that was changing hands in Cyprus? Wilbur Ross? I hope I'm remembering this correctly. I think it was something about,
I don't know that story.
yeah, and there's like people talk about this this Stephen Miller guy who looks like a Russian, just saying how it is. People talk about Stephen Miller in the administration, and there's a lot of talk about that. He's one of the chief of staff guys, or vice chief of staff in the White House, Homeland Security advisor, Stephen Miller. And there's talk about that, he's part of the windmills of Zion. He's part of the Jewish blah, blah conspiracy. Because he's listed as, has some Jewish background. But he looks like a total Russian. He looks like halfway, bit German, bit like Vladimir Putin. Looks like a Russian. And so his family, they come from Belarus. Belarus, because we say Belarus. Which was Soviet, which was Soviet for a very long time. Very strange place.
I mean, they still call it the KGB in Belarus.
Yeah.
KGB is still the KGB there.
Yeah, and so this is kind of the problem that we have when there's a person in the White House or there's a person in high Republican circles or whatever.
Wilbur Ross, is he the one with the Paradise Papers?
Let me just look that up.
I think it was. He had the Russian banking connections through Cyprus. Yeah, I think. Look, and Stephen Miller, I don't. When I hear him speak, I don't understand this perspective. I got to be honest. It doesn't seem to reach the top floor.
Well, Wilbur Ross here. It says Wilbur Ross. He used to work for the bank N.M. Rothschild and Sons. Okay, that's going to make him a target, of course, for the conspiracy crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Yale University, again, Yale. Harvard University.
Of course, he has all these Russian connections, right?
Yeah. And so he used to be with the Democratic Party, and in 2012 he shifted and supported Mitt Romney for the Republicans. Then 2016 Wilbur Ross became an advisor for candidate Donald Trump, and they knew each other for decades.
I think the special counsel Robert Mueller looked into this. This was part of the Russia thing back in 2016, if I remember right. And really, it turned out to be a bit of a nothing burger. They didn't look at Epstein back then. They didn't look at certain other connections. The mob connections.
It's like with the Russian
and the
Russian influence things.
They didn't look at that then. And this is the thing. What do you do when you've got a former FBI director leading an investigation and he doesn't look at the most obvious potential connections? He looks at this other stuff.
Yeah. It was odd. I mean, it was odd because Wilbur Ross became important. Like he became like a minister, and so then when the Paradise Papers Paradise Papers were released, this was like a big leak of shell companies.
Paradise Papers, yeah.
And so so according to reports at the time about the Paradise Papers, Wilbur Ross was somehow involved Wilbur Ross had been involved allegedly with a Russian company, which partially belonged
to oligarchs.
Yeah, which partially belonged to people very close to Putin.
This. Yeah.
Very close to Putin.
I barely remember this, but it just the thing is that look, these connections to, I think the Epstein thing, because of Ghislaine Maxwell being the daughter of Robert Maxwell, I think because with what Senator Whitehouse is saying about moving $1 billion to Russian banks that Jeffrey Epstein was doing, that Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing the Israeli prime minister and wouldn't set foot in Israel because maybe if that Israeli prime minister told Mossad, he'd be arrested and he would never see the light of day out of Israel again. I mean, the fact that to me, it seems quite obvious that Jeffrey Epstein was a Russian honey trap, and because of all of his trips to Russia and because of his connection to Robert Maxwell, there's there's a lot
Oh
of
yeah, and
evidence
Epstein was
now of
Epstein had.
Robert Maxwell
It
being
must have been easy
KGB. I
for
mean,
Epstein. It must have been easy for Epstein to then also cultivate some relationships with other intelligence agencies around the world. But this is like what an agent does. You know, if you're working primarily for Moscow, if you're working primarily for Russia, they may instruct you to let yourself or to they will instruct you to start certain relationships with different intelligence
well, there's
services
also
around the
false
world.
flag operations where Epstein could actually tell people he's a Mossad agent in order to disguise his true employer, who
Yeah,
he's
and
really
Moscow
working
will
with.
give you successes. That's another thing. There's so many people that comment on this. They don't understand the basics of espionage, or especially
Yeah.
Soviet espionage.
Well, that's part of the
When
scissors strategy, is giving your own
yeah, a
operatives
lot of
within
people.
another agency success.
There were people that were recruited first by Russia, or Soviet intelligence, and then they were instructed to join a Western intelligence service because they said, we think this is gonna be a good fit. You can get information for us. We're gonna train you. We're gonna use our other means so you can get into, let's say, West German intelligence service, foreign service or domestic service. So they sent him there, and then Moscow would give this person, their asset, their spy, successes. Right? They sacrifice some things. They sacrifice some little operations and little assets. So their guy in, for example, West German intelligence will look like a winner, and he will move up the ranks, and he will get access to more intelligence, and he seems like a professional guy who can be successful. So, with the but when Trump was campaigning and it was becoming serious, and the CNP was getting on board and blah blah blah, why weren't enough people looking at his past and saying, this is crazy? He was hanging around Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, it only took one female journalist to untangle a lot of this mess. Julie K. Brown. If one little journalist could do this with a little bit of money from the Miami Herald, why couldn't the United States apparatus do this? It must have been because of heavy infiltration to move obstacles.
Yeah.
Move obstacles out of the way. Now, this is just one scenario, possible scenario.
The corruption, I think we've always had corruption. Of course, we know since the Civil War, it's been pronounced in our politics in the United States, but it was always within certain limits. It was like, okay, the rail barons bribed certain politicians so railroads could go through. No big deal. Nobody gets hurt. But we're talking about corruption now at a level that foreign intelligence services can exploit it. You have blackmail, you have compromat, you have all kinds of things going on here where people are enriching themselves. They are getting promoted. And then you have the Chinese influencing the left, the Russians influencing the right and MAGA, and you've got all these MAGA personalities that are really anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, like Tucker Carlson, like Douglas McGregor, Scott Ritter, Napolitano. You've got these, and Tucker Carlson's a big name. What has he got? 5 million followers of his broadcasts. He was the most popular Fox News presenter at the time of his firing, and of course you've got Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly, who've now joined the court, and they've all sort of tended to this anti-Israel kind of stance. And of course, look, let's talk about Israel for a second. Israelis have always been in this terrible position in the Middle East since the Holocaust and the movement of Jews out of Europe into Israel, the Exodus, as it was called, the forming of the State of Israel, were initially with Czech weapons. And I should remind people that the Communist Revolution in Czechoslovakia in 1948 happened in February. So the whole Israel thing, January through February, the Czech communist regime didn't cut off Israel of the weapons that they were sending. They doubled down on it. right? And with Stalin giving the green light to Israel, because Stalin thought Israel was going to
Mm.
become a socialist country, excuse me, and join the socialist bloc. And the United States did not send any material help to Israel. In fact, the Eisenhower administration in the 1956 Suez War and the Israelis invaded the Sinai as the British and the French invaded, to take the
Mm.
canal, the Suez Canal. The Eisenhower administration told them to get out. We went against our allies and we went against Israel. And of course, John F. Kennedy gave loans to Israel the first time, but they had to pay them back. We weren't giving Israel any freebies. We didn't support them in the 6 Day War in 1967. We were spying on the Israeli military and giving the intelligence to Egypt and
Yeah.
Syria. That's a fact. The USS Liberty. That's why the Israelis attacked it. It was going to cause a lot of Israeli casualties. So we were actually in a kind of low intensity betrayal of Israel at that time. It wasn't until
Mm.
1974 or 1973 rather, in the Yom Kippur War, that Richard Nixon actually stepped in when Israel was going to collapse. They were running out of ammunition. They were running out of military supplies. We started to send them supplies so they could continue that war. And of course, what evolved the peace talks with Sadat and Begin, eventually under Jimmy Carter, the Camp David Accords, we ended up with giving both Israel and Egypt billions of dollars every year to keep the peace. Why? Because America's real interest is with the Arabs. This Arab-Israeli war was a problem for us because when Nixon supported Israel over the Arabs, we got oil embargoed.
Mm.
And if you were here in America, you could go to a gas station and there was no gas. No gas. I
Yeah.
remember going
Yeah.
with my family and we couldn't get gas
Yeah,
anywhere.
it's not as simple as these talking heads make it out to be, and also when you go deep, and you see like what was it, a Stephen Miller in the White House, or you see some billionaire like Adelson or whatever, and like a Jewish guy in the White House, or a Jewish billionaire giving money to Trump or whatever. It's very difficult when you try an investigation of who these people really are. Now, of course, there's these amateurs out there. They say, "Oh, there's some Jewish background. That means he must be working for Israel or the
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 Jewish,
windmills of
the
Zion."
anti-Semitism, yeah.
The
I mean,
windmills of
what you're
Zion,
talking about.
but in
Yeah.
essence,
Well,
when you
the anti-Semitism, I should say, why anti-Semitism? People forget. If you read the history of anti-Semitism in the U.S. before World War II, it was massive anti-Semitism everywhere. We're not some kind of Jewish state here, as the Hitler people thought. The fact of the matter was there was a lot of anti-Semitism in America before World War II. What happened? The Holocaust happened, right? The Jews were persecuted in Europe. It created a lot of sympathy. The Nazis were our enemies. It's like, oh, the Nazis did that to the Jews. So you had a whole generation of Americans who fought in
yeah,
World War II, and the Jews were a people that got persecuted by this enemy of ours, a guy who declared war on America. And so anti-Semitism was no longer decent. So anti-Semitism was muted in the United States while the greatest generation, what we call the greatest generation who fought World War II, while they were alive. Now you look at the Normandy commemorations every June, and you see that number. We're now down to people who are 100 years old,
yeah,
right? Being the last, over 100 years old, being the last survivors of World War II, being at that Normandy commemoration. Who knows? Maybe there'll only be a dozen of them there this year. I don't know how many of them there will be, but that generation is gone, except for people over 100. The generation that fought World War II is largely gone. So isn't it funny that the old anti-Semitism, what we had in America before World War II, and people don't even remember this, but I'm old enough. I knew the generation. I knew two of my great grandparents. I knew all of my grandparents. I knew that anti-Semitism was a reality in their memories in the United States. And so this idea that America is this pro-Jewish place,
yeah,
and here we see all, Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson. I'm sorry, Tucker, but you're saying things that are anti-Semitic tropes. Sorry about that. This anti-Israel, anti-Semitism has now reemerged.
yeah.
Why?
And
Because the generation and the consensus that grew up around that generation that fought World War II is now died off.
yeah, I mean, it's like there's like some places, where Jewish people could, they had more of a community like in New York City, but outside, I mean, there was so many old networks on the East Coast, as elite clubs, secret societies. They didn't want Jews. They just, some of these even student, very powerful student organizations, they wouldn't take any Jewish members. This
Oh,
was
in
like a,
before World War II, in social clubs in the United States, no Jews allowed. They
yeah.
didn't allow Jews in.
And when you see like a Stephen Miller, he's a Jewish guy in the White House and blah blah blah, and he looks Russian, or you look at some other guy that's been dragged into the these silly debates out there, and they say, oh my God, he's a Jewish guy and he looks German, or then you see Jewish billionaire donating money to Trump over and over again, right? And then people say, well, that's the windmills of Zion, but they don't exist. So what's really going on with these individuals that make individual decisions? Now, there are some cases. If you trace them back, their families, and there are some of these events in Europe that happened. It gets really interesting because there was a serious communist or socialist slash communist intelligence before the revolution in Russia. That's a big factor. You see, before all this craziness happened in Russia, and before there was a Soviet Union, there was already a very strong socialist movement in various places, especially Europe, and also in the old Russian Empire. In places like the Baltics and Poland and Belarus and Russian territory, right? So there were all kinds of people that used to be peasants, and they just were very angry, and the communists offered them some revolutionary fantasy. We're gonna just take all the stuff from the government and take all the land and redistribute, and nobody's going to have any serious private property, so we're all going to live happily ever after and have a socialist economy. So a lot of people became communists. Regular Russians, regular former peasants, Slavic Russians. Normal Russians became communists. They signed contracts with the Red Army. They shot other Russians. And even before the revolution, people became communist, and they started doing operations. They started their networks, communist cells, infiltrating parts of society and just doing things that were dangerous. And some people who became communists, some of these people who became communist, they had a Jewish background. And of course, that was the pitch towards them. Look, you were either peasants, or you were under all these special mean rules. Pogroms, and the government would let it happen, or they would close down Jewish schools for years or sometimes decades, and they would crack down on Jewish communities. In the old Russian Empire under the Tsars, and in Belarus and in Poland and blah 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 blah. So, according to that pitch, you need to join communism, and this is how we're going to liberate everything, because this white or regular imperialism, that has been the death of Jews. That's been the destruction of Jews. All these empires for millennia, all these mean empires, they tried to oppress Jews and destroy Jews. So you should become a communist. Some Jewish people believed this pitch. They fell for it, and they became communists. So even before the revolution in Russia, and afterwards, of course, they were sending spies all around the world, spies to Western Europe, spies to Eastern Europe, spies to the United States, disguised as migrants and refugees, flooding all these other countries with spies. Some of these spies were Jewish, but that happened before the Soviet Union. That already happened before the revolution in Russia. There was already already communist intelligence. And so when you hear a story, some guys from the Baltics, some Jewish people from the Baltics, they came to America, or some Jews from Poland came to America, Jews from Russia, it's different times. Jews from Russia, they would go to the United States. Some of them were spies. Some of them had a Jewish background. Some of them did not have a Jewish background. Some of these people were spies. And when you create spy rings, when you create these whole sleeper rings, you can try to cause some serious damage to the U.S. You could infiltrate, these traditional white networks. You can infiltrate or infiltrate Jewish communities that were growing in New York.
Traditional white networks?
Yeah, like if there's like total German migrants or total English or Scottish migrants coming to the US, but they were somebody's spy, they could click with Americans who looked like them, right? Oh, Jewish background. Oh, English background, Scottish background.
Trump's grandfather who went to the Yukon and provided prostitutes for the Yukon miners?
Well, it's like we have to look at this. We have to look at this with a counterintelligence mindset and look at some of these stories of where people magically, sometimes really fast, became very influential, very wealthy. These rags to riches stories. Because everybody wanted to flood the U.S. with spies, not just the communists, but the communists were very, very good at that. And so this is what makes an investigation so complex. When you look at somebody in the White House or somebody who's a billionaire or multimillionaire or whatever, and you look at somebody and it says, "Oh, this person is Jewish." Well, what does that mean? What does that tell us? It doesn't really tell us much. It had some Jewish parents or grandparents. So ethnically, he looks. This person looks like half German, half Russian, or like Epstein. Epstein looks like part German, part Italian. That's what he looked like. He didn't look Middle Eastern. So this is kind of it's difficult to make these investigations.
I think Epstein's ancestors were from the former Russian Empire.
Russians? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where his ancestors came from, the former Pale of Settlement, the Russian Empire. They, were, a lot of Jews, because of the Black Hundreds and the persecution, the pogroms that were then happening against Jews in the Russian Empire, they came to America. And they weren't, I think the Jewish community here in the United States that was before that, it tended to be quite conservative. But this influx, massive number of Jews from the East, they tended, because of their because of the Tsarist regime, they were anti-conservative in the Russian sense. And this is where you get a lot of Jews in New York, for example, joining the Communist Party. Yeah. And then having a real problem when the Communist Party started to support Hitler with the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Which there's an interesting story about that, about how the Jews were sat down and told, "Are you communists or are you Jews?" And this was the communist leaders of the Communist Party.
Some people
browbeating the Jews to say you have to stay in the party or you can leave.
Yeah, all some of these Jewish academics that were escaping from Europe and came to the U.S. and then they continued to develop this Frankfurt school of socialism and changing societies with critical theory and such. So this was,
those scholars were largely Jewish. Those Frankfurt scholars.
Of course, some Jewish people would fall for this pitch. They would accept this socialist pitch and try to do this academic work and influence society. But that doesn't mean socialism or anything bad attached to socialism is a purely Jewish phenomenon from the windmills of Zion. Why did the initial first Soviet or the initial Soviet government, they had a certain quota of people with a Jewish background, but these backgrounds were diverse. Some people had like the smallest possible Jewish background imaginable. And a lot of them, they just wanted to be communists, like all these other Russians. And over the years, a lot of these initial revolutionaries were purged. And so, and this, went on and on and on. This went on. Eventually, Stalin had this idea of, or subsequent, and subsequent Soviet leaders had this idea, we could flood Israel. We could flood Israel with spies. We can recruit them in Russia and the Soviet Union because we have Jewish communities here. We can just recruit more agents among these Jews because they can't refuse. We can force them to become assets, and then we'll send them to Israel or the U.S. So there was that idea. But this this socialist phenomenon was intended to be regardless of your ethnic background or your religious background. It's like a cult aimed at everybody. I mean, Hitler had a cult that was exclusive for a specific ethnic group or an ethnic makeup. So they had like the hierarchy of, like the more blonde people and the less blonde people, but you had to be in this framework, and then you could be part of that cult. But socialism or communism was a cult aimed at everybody. And all kinds of people fell for it because they had a peasant background. Because it just people were burned out and angry. People became socialists from all walks of life, all over Europe, and this is how it happened. So it's interesting to to figure out who really wanted to make Trump president, right? I mean, the groups like the CNP, the Council for National Policy, they had some weird members. They had like this powerful guy with a priest background who was like one of the leaders. And then a few years ago, there was, shortly before he died, that all these people came forward and said, he would and said he was secretly gay, and he did illegal things and blah blah blah. So I think they settled, or there was some sort of settlement with these cases. But all of that is a possible entry point for Russian espionage. Possible, very very likely. Possible entry point, these kind of things, for Russian espionage. If you get people, assets into the CNP or some of these evangelical churches, you catch one of the leaders with something and you recruit them. And of course, the Russians could tell them, we're conservative now. We're not communists anymore. We are so Christian now in Russia. We caught you doing something. And we're not the only ones who may find out about this stuff, so we can protect you, but you have to be, do things for us too. We're your friends. It's not like we're blackmailing you or anything. We're trying to help. And then of course they can sort of influence things. And then of course with Trump, over 10 years ago, it was these influencers. It was this massive internet phenomenon where a lot of these activists who could tip the scale in terms of an election, if 1 million people or 2 million or 3 million people decide to vote Republican or not vote at all, the truther types, the new right-wing, alt-right activists, this could tip the scale. And so these networks back then, who were already these online networks who were already pro-Russia back then, very pro Russia back then. These networks were systematically attacking all these other candidates that were competitors to Trump. Saying, this guy is terrible, this guy is bad, this guy is the New World Order, this guy works for the windmills of Zion, but not Trump. And I said at the time, this kind of doesn't make sense because Trump has always had people around him with a Jewish background Jewish donors. Then the transition team, there were Jewish people there. And I said, this doesn't make any sense. It's not logical what this online campaign was saying, that Trump would save us from the windmills of Zion, that he would work with Putin, who's also fighting the windmills of Zion because he, removed some of these KGB-run fake oligarchs over there because they were just not on board so much anymore. This would all, fight the windmills of Zion and all this over-promising. Trump would arrest the deep state, the left. He would arrest these Democrats, and he would unravel the corruption of the pharmaceutical industry. Trump would finally unveil the decisive files on 9/11 and the JFK assassination and everything under the sun. All this over-promising. It made no sense. The Q cult made no sense. By saying this weird oracle on the internet was just talking about this super secret group that's going to save us all. And then what Flynn was saying and Alex Jones was saying and Steve Pacinic were saying, there's this salvation coming. There's this secret operation going on. It's going to save us all. And this weird campaign online from people that were, or influencers and followers that were pro-Russia, that were decisively pro-Russia, these people kind of tipped the scale, apparently, and Trump became president. And now we see these circles attacking Trump. And in Europe, we see all these outlets. They were always pro-Russia. They were celebrating Trump. They were celebrating Trump for a long time. Then they were becoming skeptical when because of Ukraine, because the Trump admin would not totally abandon Ukraine. They became skeptical. It's like, we're not so sure yet. And now with this Iran thing, there's now pure hatred. Now they're saying Trump is the devil. Trump is the devil because America is the devil, and is all run by Israel and blah blah blah.
Of course, Trump isn't the devil because America is the devil. Trump is the devil because, look, everyone can see the extreme narcissism of Trump's personality coming through the erratic, almost crazy tweeting, the back and forth. I mean, to threaten to leave NATO, having already threatened to annex Canada and Greenland, attacking Iran without having thought through the implications of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz as a possibility, not having the actual military wherewithal to keep the strait open. They're working on this now. Of course, Central Command is trying to find a new passage through the strait that will allow them to bypass the more Iranian-controlled or endangered part of it. But however that plays out, this should have all been worked out weeks ago before they went ahead with this attack, this ill-considered attack. And then the treacherous or perfidious manner of the attack, killing leaders. I dread this because it means that our leaders can be targeted by these people. We started this. They didn't start murdering our leaders or assassinating them on the way to a negotiation like what happened to Soleimani in January of 2020. This bothered me enormously because there are certain rules of war. When people say, "Oh, these are terrorists, thugs, and criminals," well, you can characterize them how they would be, but they weren't targeting our leaders to massacre them. We did that. We opened the Pandora's box of that. And so I think Trump does not have a moral compass. He doesn't, certainly, because there is morality even in war. There has to be. You can't act like anything goes. And Trump seems to act that way. And that's very troubling to me, as an American especially, because that doesn't work. It's never worked in history. All the people in history who play that way, they end badly. I can't think of anyone who doesn't end badly. So that even when some of the worst people in history do have certain lines they won't cross, And Trump is showing us, well, what line won't this guy cross? It's troubling. So I just have to say that I, Kamala Harris and the Democrats, doesn't mean would vote for them, that I'm for them. I'm against them. I know that they're on the side of Beijing, that they're bought and paid for by them, but there's two paths of suicide here. The Democratic Party, open border, cap and trade, believe in global warming, crush the economy by cutting off our energy, by just going to wind farms and making unreliable energy sources like your country, Germany, has done. I know that's a suicide path. But now cutting off the Strait of Hormuz and getting involved in wars and using assassination, that's another path of suicide, and alienating our allies. He not only attacks his political allies now, Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and those people, but he's attacked our NATO allies. And he insulted the Japanese prime minister recently over Pearl Harbor. I mean, it was all uncalled for, ridiculous. I mean, this guy's an embarrassment. 25th Amendment time. But J.D. Vance, this is a guy I don't trust, a guy who goes and campaigns for Orban in Hungary. Orban is part of the enemy camp. How can Rubio go to a NATO meeting and then not talk to any of the leaders except go and into a huddle with Orban? See, this is very bad, right? I mean, anybody can see it's not just the optics. This is like, there's something wrong with these people.
Yeah, it's like when people made a big deal out of what was it, Hexeth and his tattoos. The super Catholic tattoos, or the what was it, Templars tattoos.
Christians aren't supposed to tattoo their bodies, by the way. They're not supposed to. Your body is your temple. You don't put marks on it.
Let me just.
That's the way I was raised, anyway. That's what I was taught when I was a kid.
Yeah. So the tattoos. The tattoos of Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War, he got the Jerusalem cross, the writing Deus vult, that means God wants it in Latin, Kafir, that's Arabic for unbeliever, and some other stuff. So this is like the big cross with the four little crosses. This was
he has the word kafir written in his tattoo.
That's one of the tattoos, yeah. Or kufar. I think they would pronounce it more like kufar, the unbelievers.
Yeah, it's like, well, in South Africa they would say kafir.
Yeah, and it's like a very Templar, crusade kind of stuff, and of course it's some silly people out there. They will say that the Crusades were the most horrible thing ever, but you gotta understand history, and you gotta understand the Islamic power at the time. The Caliphate, which was extremely hardcore and expanding and trying to attack Europe. They try to have a pincer attack against Europe at some point. Then he has a tattoo that says "Ne desit virtus." That means let the bravery not fail, something like that. He's got a cross with a sword. And so this is like something. That maybe or may tie into this sort of harebrained idea that you can pull the Russians to our side, because they made all this. They made all this kerfuffle with talking about the czars and how this is the old system and that's the good system, be a classic empire. This is what Putin talked about so much, also in the Tucker interview. And just maybe part of this weird negotiations, right? Just to try to put a wedge between the Russians and the Chinese, which is not realistic, because they've created each other over there. The Russians had the revolution first, and then they designed the Chinese revolution. They financed it, they trained it, they equipped it, they made all the purges to make sure that these Chinese people would play ball. And everybody knew in Eastern Europe, these are puppet regimes. These are Moscow's puppets. But in Asia, the strategy was to pretend that these Asians were doing their own communism, and these Asians don't really like the Russians, and the Russians don't really like them. So this whole staged, these staged animosities, and we talked about this in a whole episode. In the 19, I think it was during the 1960s, when the theatrics of the communists became these theatrical fake animosities among the communists became so great that Henry Kissinger was finally able to convince Richard Nixon to do some kind of wedge tactic, try to play off the communist states against each other, while making all these weird compromises, which was silly. So it's like the Russians knew this was coming. I mean, the Russians the Russians can stage new animosities with the Chinese. The Chinese can say, we want Russian land because we need space and we want some Russian resources. And the Russians can say, we don't want to give the Chinese that, but we kind of do have to because we're losing in Ukraine and it's not really going so well. So maybe the Russians can. The Russians are in a position. The Russians are in a position to pretend they're interested in making a pact with the U.S. or the conservatives in the U.S. But it seems so old school empire. What Hegseth is symbolizing sometimes with his tattoos, and Trump, Trump kind of playing the role of a king. It seems so old school. It seems like a lot of Americans, they don't understand what America is supposed to be. It's like, would some of these people online now, they call themselves patriots, but would they be fans of King George III nowadays? Would they support King George III?
Yeah, because they would tend to be pro-monarchy, yes. I think Catholics versus Protestants have a tendency, unless they're high Anglican, to favor republics. And this was what Cromwell and the Roundheads, when they chopped off Charles I's head, were about. Because the Reformation, Protestantism, monarchy and Catholicism were really integral to each other. So I think we realize that from history.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the big churches, the big churches in Paris, and it was so strange, when the monarchy in France, they wanted to control the Catholic Church, and they wanted to use that for the French Empire. But then the Catholics, they were kind of doing their own things. They had their own espionage and their own kind of ideas. And one of the vehicles that was used for some serious secret operations, one of the vehicles was the Jesuit order. And also in Britain, you had for a time in Britain you had Catholic kings, and then there was the change. And the Catholics, they tried, or Catholic networks, they tried secret operations to, change Britain again. And for a long time, the French government, or the French monarchy, they were feeding into these Jesuit capabilities. But then the French monarchy was becoming really concerned about that. Sporadically, they would even ban the Jesuits or some Jesuit activities in France, because this was kind of spiraling out of control. And we know what happened to the Knights Templars. Eventually, France and their partners, France and their partners, they were trying to pull the rug from under the Knights Templars. and have like this secret coordinated mass arrest, and they would torture Templar knights for information. That never made the history books, though. They just say, show trials about homosexual activities and spitting on a cross, but they were trying to get information about what the Templars were doing, all where their assets were, their operations, anything of value. And so it's like
Had the Templars absorbed what you'd call Gnostic ideas in their travels in the Far East, and is that
sure they would absorb
did they become
anything.
esotericists? They were problematic within the Catholic Church at the time.
Yeah, they would absorb anything, and at some point, some of these Catholic orders, they would start to make deals with the Muslims. Exchange knowledge, exchange techniques, and so this was really concerning.
I've heard a couple of commentators say that Islam is a Gnostic religion, that it is basically Gnostic. It's interesting. I'd have to check with Eric Berglund to see if he categorized in that way, but I've heard people say that there's a basic sort of Gnostic strain that runs through Islam, particularly, of course, Shiite Islam, I think, more than the other, but it'd be interesting, the theological aspects. But certainly when you have contact with a alien religion, because of where you're going in the Middle East, this can have an effect on your own beliefs, on your own thoughts.
Yeah, and you draw from older stuff, the Eastern Roman Empire or the Persian cult system, and you just absorb experts.
You had Aristotle being translated into Arabic because Arabs got the big chunk of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Muslims did, and suddenly you have texts from Aristotle reaching the West, because of the Arabs.
Yeah. And it's strange to see. I mean, it's
the Turks.
It's strange to see how
Greek volumes coming to the Renaissance really triggered the Renaissance by some people's estimation.
And it's strange to see some of this European stuff, or this crazy crazy European stuff, made its way to the U.S. and people don't know where to set limitations to that. I mean, do Americans really want this craziness? All this secrecy and these different orders, and everybody tries to infiltrate everybody, and just Masonry and Jesuits and
well, you got Manly P. Hall and Esoteric America. They've got this. Some of these people, I think Hall was pretty learned in some respects, but not in a sort of academic way. But it really had a big effect. All the American occult, occult America is not just simply a rumor. It's been a thing. I mean, the spiritualist movement started here with the Fox sisters, right? Where the table tapping and the seances and stuff, that really was a phenomenon that started here, and it spread to Europe from here. It was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who wrote the history of the spiritualist movement.
Yeah, and Tucker talks about Tucker Carlson talked about he got scratched up by demons, and he had 4 dogs sleeping with him.
That's very strange. Do you believe that when he talks about that? Does that sound?
No, I don't believe anything he's saying. I don't believe anything he's saying. He may sometimes say things that are true when it suits him, but
he's self-dramatizing, isn't it?
I have zero trust level with this guy, because at a time he was saying, oh, he's totally for Trump and he's totally for all these ideas, and meanwhile at Fox, in his personal messages that came out because of these lawsuits against Fox, he was of a completely different opinion. And people are digging up this old clips where he says that, well, the Iranian regime is terrible, it should be destroyed, and he doesn't like Muslims, and he insults Muslims, insults Muslims all the way, and then now he's the complete opposite. He's a completely new Tucker, but he sounds the same, and he says all these different things, same tone, same voice, same apparent conviction. It's crazy, and it's like, there's like this pay for play thing in right-wing politics, I mean, the left does it as well. We talked about this when Kamala Harris was campaigning Tim Walz, and they had sent Tim Walz through this cadre school of communism, I looked at the books, the teaching books, or the foundational books of that cadre school, and they said, well, our audience is stupid. We consider them to be stupid. If we come at them with logic and arguments, they're going to hate us, they're going to abandon us. So we're just going to be very simple with them, simple promises, emotion, personal anecdotes, because they're idiots. That's how they see their voters. And so they trained Tim Walz to be exactly that, and he played that role so well. But in the right wing, there was this ecosystem created where everybody needs a billionaire. Everybody needs a billionaire or multimillionaire, and then they pay you. Sometimes it's a legal loophole, sometimes it's gray area, sometimes it's even illegal, especially the foreign influence campaigns. There's been talk about investigations now. Some people are saying there are horrible people on the web, and they're saying they've been informed by their service providers, mail and cloud storage and whatever, that there was a subpoena. They had to give out these records, that these people are under investigation. Interesting to see what's gonna come out of all of this. But it's just this pay for play thing. Everybody needs these weirdo networks. Everybody needs a billionaire. And everybody has to sign these non-disclosure agreements where they can never really talk about any of this stuff. They get sued into oblivion. It's like total confusion with people. It's like they don't know what to make of anything. They don't know what to make of the Ukraine war. They don't know what to make of Iran. They don't know they don't understand Russia. They don't understand anything. They don't understand America now. Total confusion. Right? Some of these people, they talk about like they would have been the biggest fans of King George III. And they don't understand who King George III was and his gigantic family cluster and how the British Empire really worked. And it's like the Americana has sort of evaporated because it's all been slogans. I mean, you listen to Alex Jones. I mean, he used to say he's kind of like Texan royalty, or Texan aristocracy. His family was so important in Texas, allegedly. Now he's saying his ancestors conquered Europe. Like, who tells him that crap? Who tells him that crap to flatter his ego? And then Jones says, you got to go with the Russians because that's like Tsar Putin. Does he understand who the czars were for the last 150 or 200 years of the czars? Does he know what kind of aristocratic families those were? How close they were to King George III? So it's like everything has been turned upside down. Everything has been perverted, and these people have millions of followers. And there's always some weirdo pay to play thing going on. And now there's like Milo Yiannopoulos is attacking Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer is attacking him. Roger Stone has turned on Laura Loomer. And they all want to sue each other for some reason, and they all want to expose everybody's weird
This is getting
secrets.
quite ridiculous, isn't it? Laura Loomer and Yiannopoulos, Milo Yiannopoulos. I don't, these people were kind of, in a way, there was something not quite right about a lot of these people when they first emerged. But these are celebrity, podcasters and what we call it, digital media masters. And, people put money behind them and people found them very popular. But what is the real intellectual content of their analysis? How good is it? How good is what they're saying? How worthwhile is it? How far have they seen into the future? And I don't know. I haven't really paid that much attention to them.
Well, Joe Rogan has sort of turned on Trump He's massively disappointed and blah blah blah. I mean, he knew
Yeah,
what he was
sure, of
getting into.
course,
He knew what he
because
was getting
Trump.
into.
Well,
He was one of the
I think
guys. He was
we all kind of knew a little bit what we were getting into with Trump because we
Yeah,
could
but it gets
see.
worse. It gets worse. People now figured out that wait a minute. Rogan had
But
cultivated
really,
this.
a lot of us, for me, I said Trump's first term was a train wreck because he wasn't keeping his promises, and of course, Ann Coulter turned against him too for the same reason. He didn't do what he said he was going to do. He was a media attention hog, trying to just. It was clear what his personality was
Yeah,
like,
but
but he
then but
was
then
still preferable, given his first term. He was still way preferable to the Democrats. So
yeah,
we
but
all thought
has Joe
the second
Rogan
term's going
kept
to be
had
like the first term, right?
but these influencers started acting like politicians. They were getting onto a hype train and were getting off when it seemed opportunistic for them, and they make all these excuses. I didn't do anything wrong. It's all Trump's fault. The old Trump was great. He was the chosen one, but the new Trump is controlled by Israel. So nobody wants any accountability. These influencers act like the worst sort of politicians. I mean, did Joe Rogan keep his what his persona promised? Like, he's the cool guy. He says it like it is. He wants to make everything better and improve people's lives. And he used to say he was a leftist on so many issues. He was basically a leftist who looks like a Republican. Then he supported Trump, and now he says, "Oh no, it's like, oh, it's not what I wanted. It's just like, I don't think it's cool anymore." But then Rogan had all these guests on who were really close to Jeffrey Epstein. Like, what was it, Thiel or some other people? People have made lists of these former Epstein associates.
I
They were
mean, look,
powerful guests on Joe Rogan.
yeah.
Like, what is going on?
Well,
And then Rogan,
well,
he was featuring his friend, the guy with the mullet, this Theo Vaughn, who's like who was from like a small aristocratic family, who was became impoverished. So now he has like this mullet hairstyle to appear down to earth to his audience, but he's a comedian who got to know Trump's family. And then he had this crash out recently on Joe Rogan's show. Theo Vaughn was just saying, it's all terrible. All of our money goes to Israel and the war and blah, blah, blah.
all our money goes to Israel.
Yeah,
That's funny.
And Rogan was saying, man, you need to chill out. You need to, have some fun and relax. You're getting too worked up. And so people were left with this decision. Should we go with what Rogan says and just chill out? Or should we go with Theo Vaughn and believe, oh, he's the guy who tells it like it is? They're comedians. They're both comedians. They don't know anything. But even Theo Vaughn has a seriously powerful podcast now. Like, this is not going to help us. This is not going to fix anything. Now some of these people say, well, maybe we should vote Democrat in the midterms. We should vote Democrat, but the same thing is going to happen again. The Republican Party, the Republicans, the GOP is built to resist change. They always do the same tricks. When the Democrats start winning, people get panicked and they cling to the GOP, and they do this big tent strategy all over again. Say we got a new right wing now. And the evangelicals are now got a new push. And it's all Jesus and the flag and new influencers, and we're just gonna promise you the moon, and then they scrape together enough votes again, and then everybody gets disappointed again, and this whole cycle continues and continues and continues, decade after decade after decade. Nothing has changed in generations, really, about this cycle. And it's like, you can't trust any influencer anymore. Anybody who's popular.
Well, the thing is, this is where I go back to Hesiod. He said there are people who can think and lead. There are people who will recognize those who can think and lead, and there are those who can't think and won't follow people who can. And so what we have now is we have a information space overrun by people who can't think, who can't lead because they can't think, but they want to lead, and people who won't follow people who can. So we've been overrun by people who are not coherent, who don't really know anything, whose knowledge and pretense is a pretense, like Trump himself, like Hegseth. They posture like they know something. They posture like they have some character or substance, but they don't. They're just clowns who are posturing. And what you end up with is a whole bunch of people, they got these single issues, but they can't put anything together. They can't really understand what's happening. And as a consequence, it's just a giant bunch of narratives that are leading people down rabbit trails. And there's no coherency. We've got us and ourselves into a terrible situation. The Democrats and the communists, they have the wrong narratives. Everybody can see that. They're crazy in their own unique way. They're also derailed. There's an intellectual derailment there too, but at least they've got a consistency. And these other people, they're all imploding. And like you say, they're all fighting with each other. I mean, Nick Fuentes, very clever, very disastrous person. And not a sincere person.
Yeah, but he gets deplatformed because he was so over the top. But
he has a huge following despite being deplatformed.
Yeah, but he's in trouble. But still, he's in trouble because banks won't process his transactions. People donating to him. Streaming platforms won't let him stream. Demonetize here, demonetize there, and it's like a lot of these influencers.
He's just indecent. And so
but a lot of these people, they got into so much trouble and their lives must be hell. I mean, they may be successful for a while.
I can't believe she's being sued by the president of France for calling his wife a man. I mean, that's crazy. Alex Jones got sued. I think it was the biggest civil suit in American history, wasn't it? Got sued for
because he attacked so many people.
$1 billion judgment. Yes, it was horrific what he did. I saw the documentary on what he did. I saw his behavior in the courtroom, because they had cameras in the courtroom. He's an appalling human being. Alex Jones. He's an appalling human being.
They read stuff on air that somebody just printed off the internet from a website they didn't even know who was running it, and it was actually tied to Russia, but to Russia, by the way. And it's like they read something on air to millions of listeners, and just it was complete garbage. No adults in the room. They
stuck to that.
And when they were held accountable, they said, "We're not journalists. We just told our audience that."
They didn't understand that this guy Jones, because he's a really ochlocratic phenomenon. He's all these people who aren't that smart and well read. They're persuaded by Jones. So he has millions of people listening to this. And of course, you think it's not going to affect the lives of people who he says their children weren't really killed and it was fake at the Sandy Hook?
Yeah, initially when Trump made this social media post, this was like a day ago, 2 days ago, Trump made this post because all these influencers like Candace and Jones and Tucker and all these guys, they're all attacking Trump. We're just completely attacking Trump and calling for his removal under the 25th Amendment. So Trump responds saying, was expected, we could expect what he was going to say. They're losers, they're dumb, they got
kicked off TV.
Yeah, they're just losers, and they were never really MAGA, so screw these guys. And so the initial reaction of Jones was, I'm gonna take the high road on this. I'm not getting emotional about this. I'm just gonna take the high road. And half a day later or a day later, he was back to his old behavior, just ranting. And if you want to fight, you're at the right place. So yeah, we're gonna have a big fight, and now it's just totally on and blah blah blah. And Tucker, I think Tucker had a response that also that was also pretended to be highbrow and taking the high road. But it sounds to me like he's just accusing Trump of being under control by Israel for some Epstein-related stuff or type stuff. It was just a repetition of the base accusation against Trump.
It's all predictable. It's all quite predictable, isn't it?
And I'm supposed to. I mean, we're all supposed to pick one of these standard positions now. It's either I'm all for Trump. He's the president, no matter what he does. We're just gonna celebrate him. I'm questioning if people actually believe that, if they mean what they say, or they're just scared about the midterms. But there's like one position now that you must have, like you're all the way, Trump, all the way, just everything great, no criticism. And the other position is, he's the devil. Russia will save us. Multipolar world. Alexander Dugin all the way. The windmill. We have to fight the windmills of Zion. It's just like,
the thing is, there's nobody really. This is where friends and enemies come in, and this is what our show is called. It's they can't identify their friends from their enemies, so they can't have any consistency. They don't have any strategic sense, so they don't realize if you do not identify your enemy. Look, Russia, China, they've got the nuclear weapons and missiles pointed at us. They're the ones that have been supporting Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. They're the ones infiltrating Mexico, building up the infrastructure, pumping drones. And we've got drones operating in the United States, probing, attacking U.S. bases. I don't know if you've noticed this. It's barely in the news. But you've got, just like you have them probing, Russian drones probing Europe, causing European airports to shut down at times here in the last some months. Look, we're on the verge of World War III here. We've got fighting in Ukraine. We've got fighting in the Middle East. Right now there's a ceasefire. It's probably not going to hold. This is what some people say, that the two sides are too far apart. We've got major economic problems. We've got a grand solar minimum, and we've got the oil cut off with the fertilizer prices going up. What don't we have that's a serious problem here? And we got these clowns, these freaking clowns everywhere, sucking all the air out of the room, getting all the attention. Where, serious analysis of how we got here? What happened at the end of the Cold War? How come the peace dividend we spent was misspent? And how come we don't have enough weapons to defend the West, keep the straits open, and hold NATO together, and make sure Japan and Taiwan and South Korea secure? We're just so infiltrated, not just infiltrated physically, but mentally, infiltrated in our brains.
Yeah, I mean,
it's really, are we going to be grown-ups now and think
would you
seriously?
get surgery? Would you get surgery from a comedian? No. Would you get surgery from an activist? No. Would you get surgery from a person who used to be a Fox News host reading off of a teleprompter? No. It's just...
No, these people aren't serious. We're in a dangerous world, a dangerous situation, and these people are taking all the attention. So they've turned it into a media-type circus. It's, a digital media. It's the social media circus. And they're the performing clowns.
Oh, and the Russians are turning off the internet. I haven't been following it that closely, but like in the metropolitan areas.
Yeah, I mean, for mobile phones, yeah.
Yeah, and they would just totally they don't want this internet talk. They don't want, any sort of, rebellious talk, which is legal here.
In the old-fashioned way, yes.
Yeah, which is legal here, which is, everybody can run his mouth and, as you said, suck up all the air in the room. But in Russia, they will come after you. They will turn off the internet if they have to.
It's not like people gravitate towards a really intelligent analysis of the people that actually have some learning behind them. They don't. They gravitate towards these telegenic celebrity type. And, we know there's Russian money been pumped into a lot of these people. We know that some of these people, how did they get into their positions, and why are they so pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, in these positions and bring in the anti-Semitism? What is this? This is very subversive, and it's destructive of what used to be the conservative movement that Reagan was part of. Reagan wouldn't have accepted any of these people as part of him.
Yeah,
and what he was doing.
It's like when the Russians, maybe they were kind of clever. They would funnel money to international shell companies and then launder that money and launder it more and move it somewhere to the United States, and then have proxies, American citizens, American citizens who get the money, and then they give it to influencers, so these influencers can rest assured that they're not directly taking Russian money. But maybe the Russians were not so smart. I mean, there's all kinds of loopholes in the U.S. with advisory contracts. So you sign a contract and now you become an advisor to someone or some entity, but you're not really advising them. They give you the talking points, so you give them to the audience. It's like a subversive propaganda operation disguised as an advisory contract. And sometimes sometimes people can be paid in digital currencies, and they say, well, part of your payment is going to be in Switzerland, or it used to be Switzerland, with the bank accounts, but it's hidden in Cyprus, or it's hidden somewhere else, or we just stash it for you in Russia for the time that you have to escape. We're gonna warn you when the heat comes for you. We're gonna warn you. We're gonna exfiltrate you, and you're gonna live a fantastic life in Russia and be on the air. I mean, there has to be accountability. There has to be consequences. But I think some of the worst offenders, they have an exfiltration plan. They're gonna put on a wig and go somehow cross the border to Mexico, get to an airport, and fly to Russia. They have an exfiltration plan. They do things with a safety net or multiple safety nets. So there's no accountability. And when they reappear in Russia, they will say they're patriots. They always wanted the best for America and the best for Americans. And they get celebrated. Right?
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think we've covered it pretty good for today. Do you have any last comments you want to make before we wrap it up?
I think I'm done for today. This was just so weird.
Yeah.
This whole last 2 or 3 weeks was just too weird.
Well, yeah, it's been quite a stressful crisis. And we all are looking at this, at the markets, the hits on the markets, the threat to fertilizer, the threat to keeping that channel closed. The Strait of Hormuz is still not open to tanker traffic. We are headed into the middle of April 2026. This is becoming a very serious economic drain on many countries, and it's scary where this is going. Will it be resolved? We don't really know some of these answers. So I'm Jeff Nyquist. I'm in the United States. Alex Benesch, my co-host, has been in Germany, and we'll be back next week. We'll maybe there'll be some clarification as we've gone through almost a full 2 weeks of the ceasefire by then. So signing off. Hope you'll join us next week.